When I think about the year I turned 26, there is one night I still replay in my head when I cannot sleep. My name is Brandon Cole, and back then I lived in a cheap third-floor walk up on the edge of Cincinnati. The building was old, but the rent was low, and utilities were included, which mattered more than anything else. My unit was 3B, and right across from me was 3A. At first I thought 3A was empty. For the first month, I never heard a TV or music. The blinds were always closed. The only sign anyone lived there was a pair of work boots that sometimes sat neatly outside the door and were always gone by morning. One Tuesday night, I came home late from work and saw the door to 3A a few inches open. The boots were in their usual spot. As I passed, I glanced inside out of reflex. There was no furniture that I could see. No couch, no table. Just a bare living room and a single wooden chair facing the window. A man sat in it in the dark. He turned his head toward me but did not say anything. I muttered an apology and hurried into my place. The next morning when I left for work, the boots were gone and the door to 3A was shut tight. After that, I paid more attention. I would hear the lock on 3A turn very late at night, around 2 or 3. Slow, careful clicks. It never sounded like someone rushing in from work. It sounded like someone easing the lock as quietly as possible. One weekend, I was taking trash out when I saw him again on the stairwell. Thin guy, maybe late 30s, short brown hair, printless gray hoodie, no logo on anything he wore. He did not carry keys that I could see. He just stood on the landing between the second and third floors, leaning on the rail, listening. He looked at me with this flat expression and asked what hours I worked. I laughed and said random ones. I asked if he was in 3A. He nodded but did not offer a name. When I gave him mine, he just stared a little longer, like he was trying to memorize my face, and said that he usually stayed in his room. After that, I started noticing small things. Once I came home, and my door was unlocked, even though I was sure I had locked it that morning. Nothing was missing, nothing was broken, but my bedroom curtains were open all the way when I always left them half shut. Another time, my bathroom mirror had a faint streak on it at about eye level, like a finger had been dragged in the steam. I had not taken a hot shower that day. I tried to tell myself I was just tired and forgetting things. I changed my locks. I stopped. A few days later, I woke up at 3 in the morning to a soft scraping sound. Not loud enough to be someone breaking in, more like something small sliding slowly against wood and metal. I held my breath and listened. It came again, right at my front door. I got up quietly and walked into the living room. The peephole glowed faintly from the hall light. The scraping stopped. I stood there for a full minute staring at the door. Nothing. Then a single slow knock. Not the usual sharp rap. It was like someone had set their hand flat on the wood and pushed once. I asked who it was. A voice said my name very calmly. Brandon. It was the neighbor from 3A. He said he had heard a noise in the hall and wanted to check if I was all right. Something about that made my skin crawl. The hall was quiet except for the buzz of the fluorescent light. The only noise had been at my door. I told him through the door that I was fine and would talk to him tomorrow. He stood there a moment longer. I could see the shadow of his feet under the gap. Then he said in that same calm voice that he was glad I was usually home by midnight because it was safer that way. He tried the handle. Just once, turned it gently and let it go. Then his shadow moved away. I heard his door open and close. The next morning, there was a small piece of paper on my doormat, just a grocery store receipt, with a note on the back written in tiny, precise letters. You should keep your chain on, too. I had not mentioned that I used the chain lock. I had only installed it that week. I talked to the building manager about it. He frowned and said 3A had been empty for months. He checked the lease folder in front of me. No one was registered there. The last tenant had left 6 months earlier without giving a forwarding address. I said there was definitely a man staying there. The manager offered to go up with me. We walked to the 3rd floor together. The boots were not outside the door. The door to 3A was closed. The manager knocked loudly and called out. No answer. He unlocked it with the master key and pushed it open. The place was almost bare. No couch, no table, no bed. Just the wooden chair I had seen and a thin mattress on the floor in the bedroom. On the wall by the window, a small digital timer was taped at eye level with black tape. It was not running. On the kitchen counter, there was a neat row of items that made my stomach turn. A roll of duct tape, zip ties, a small pair of scissors, a lined notebook open to a page full of times and dates. The manager flipped the notebook toward me. The entries were all in the same small, precise handwriting. Tuesday, 1:14, 7 p.m., Cole home. Wednesday, 12:05 a.m., Cole light off. Thursday, 3:18 a.m., Cole, awake living room. Sunday, 11:59 p.m., Cole door, double locked. Page after page, my name kept appearing. Sometimes just my initials, sometimes my full name with details like shirt color or what bag I was carrying. The manager turned pale. He said maybe someone had been squatting there. He called the police. The officers searched the apartment carefully, then the whole building. No one in 3A, no sign of forced entry at any other unit. They took the notebook and tape and zip ties and told us to call if we saw the man again. That night I stayed at my friend Kevin's place. When I finally came back 2 days later, I found something new. My door had 3 tiny dents at eye level, in the wood around the peephole. I crouched and looked closely. They were in a tight triangle pattern, like someone had pressed a tool there and pivoted it gently. The chain on the inside hung at a slight angle. The screw on one side had been turned almost halfway out. I installed the camera facing my door the same day. I moved out a month later when my lease was up. The police never called with any update. Management changed the lock on 3A and eventually rented it to a young couple. I have not told them what I saw. In my new building, I still wake up around 3 in the morning for no reason and stare at the door. Sometimes I swear I hear that same measured breathing on the other side and the faintest brush of metal against wood, as though someone is testing the strength of the chain and making notes about what time I turn out my lights. I didn't grow up thinking small towns were scary. My name is Ryan Cooper, and when this happened, I was 27 and staying in a rural rental house outside Albany for a work contract. The place sat by itself at the end of a gravel road, with nothing around it but open fields and an old barn leaning sideways like it wanted to fall. The owner lived out of state and said I'd have the whole property to myself. He mentioned the attic was sealed shut because the stairs were unstable. I didn't think much about it. The house was cheap, and I only needed it for 6 weeks. The first week was quiet, a little too quiet. No passing cars at night, no neighbors, no stray dogs barking, just the hum of the refrigerator and the wind pushing against the siding. On the 8th night, as I was locking up and getting ready for bed, something caught my eye, a faint glow on the ceiling. I looked up the narrow hallway toward the attic door. A weak yellow light leaked through the crack under it. I froze. There wasn't supposed to be electricity upstairs. The owner had told me clearly the attic had no power and no working fixtures. I stood at the base of the attic door listening. At first I heard nothing. Then a soft thump, not loud, not distant, right above me. I backed into my bedroom and shut the door. I barely slept. The next morning I emailed the owner. He said no one else had keys. He said the attic door swelled sometimes in humidity and might let light in from the hallway. I walked down the hall and tested it myself. There was no gap, no way for light to leak through unless it came from the other side. That night, the light came on again. This time I didn't hide. I crept down the hall and pressed my ear to the attic door. No breathing, no movement, just that small, steady light glow. My heart was hammering. I slid the new deadbolt I'd installed into place and forced myself back to the bedroom. At 2 in the morning, something woke me, a soft rattling sound. I sat up and held my breath. The deadbolt on the attic door clicked once, then again. Someone was testing it. I stayed perfectly still until sunrise. The next day, I drove to the hardware store and bought a motion sensor camera. I mounted it in the hallway facing the attic. When night came, I sat in bed watching the camera feed on my phone. Around 1:30, the hallway stayed dark except for the tiny camera light. Then the attic light snapped on so fast I flinched. A shadow passed across the crack at the bottom of the door. Slow, like someone stepping close. The camera didn't pick up movement from the hallway. Whatever was moving was behind the door. Then the deadbolt shifted again. One tiny metallic tap. I called the only local number I had, a farmer I'd met down the road who'd lent me a toolbox the first day. His name was Clay. I told him I thought someone had gotten inside. He didn't ask questions. He told me to stay in my room and he'd be there in 10 minutes. I waited with my back against the bedroom door, clutching a flashlight like a weapon. Clay arrived fast. His truck lights swept through the windows. He came inside, calling out my name. His voice was steady but low, like he didn't want to alert anyone. We walked to the attic door together. The light underneath was still glowing. He tried the handle. It didn't budge. The deadbolt held. He stepped back and whispered, "I didn't think they'd start again this early." I asked him what he meant. He shook his head and pressed his ear to the door. After a long moment, he said, "We're opening it." I told him that was insane. Whatever was inside didn't want to leave. But he said something that made my stomach drop. If someone broke in from outside, we'd have seen tracks. Nobody's come or gone. If something's inside, it's because it was already here before you moved in. He slid the deadbolt open, gripped the doorknob, and pulled. It didn't open at first. Then it gave with a dry crack. The light inside flickered. A small bulb hanging from the beam was lit. Clay stepped up 2 creaking stairs and raised his flashlight. The attic was empty. Just bare floorboards and insulation. No boxes, no furniture, no footprints in the dust, nothing. Except one thing. Near the far corner was a long piece of rope, frayed at one end, stretched tight between 2 support beams. At the center of it dangled a metal hook attached to a length of old wire. I asked Clay what it was. He didn't answer. He just climbed back down and shut the door. He told me to pack my bag. He said he'd explain once we got off the property. We drove a mile down the road before he finally talked. He said the house had a history the owner didn't advertise. 30 years earlier, a man who lived there vanished. The official story was that he left town, but locals said different. They said he spent nights in the attic, convinced he heard noises there. Said he slept up there sometimes. Spiral notebooks full of rambling notes were found next to a similar rope and hook setup. Notes describing someone walking above him at night. Clay said the lights turning on and off happened for weeks after the man disappeared, then stopped. Until I moved in. I kept asking what the rope was for, but he just said it was part of what kept him awake. That night I slept on Clay's couch. When morning came, he drove me back to pick up my things. The house looked quiet again. No lights, no noise. Only one thing was different. The attic door was wide open, and on the hallway floor beneath it, my camera lay smashed to pieces. I moved out by noon. I didn't care about breaking the lease. I didn't care about losing my deposit. I wasn't spending one more night listening to someone test that deadbolt. Sometimes, when I'm alone in my new place and the house settles, I hear a faint click in the walls, a metallic tap, like someone gently trying a lock in a room that isn't there. And I remember that warm glow leaking from under a door that was supposed to stay shut forever. I had no reason to be afraid of the neighborhood when I first moved in. My name is Zachary Holt, and I was 25 at the time, renting a small single-bedroom house at the dead end of Palmer Street, right where the pavement stopped and the woods began. The price was cheap because the owner wanted long-term tenants, and I figured the quiet would help me focus on work. I had been there maybe a week before the first strange thing happened. It was around dusk, and I was sitting on the small porch eating dinner when I saw someone standing at the tree line behind my backyard. A tall man, gray jacket, hood up, not moving, just standing in the shadow of the trees, with his hands by his sides. At first I assumed it was a hiker cutting through the woods, but he didn't walk, didn't turn, didn't seem to be looking at anything except my house. When I stood, he stepped backward into the darkness and vanished between the trees. I told myself it was nothing. Rural areas have people wandering around. Maybe he lived nearby. 2 nights later, I woke up at 3 in the morning to a faint snapping sound outside, like a twig breaking under someone's foot, then soft crunching. slow footsteps. I opened the blinds a sliver. There was a man at the edge of the yard again. Same height, same gray jacket, standing completely still, with his face turned toward my bedroom window. I felt a cold, sharp bolt of fear. I closed the blinds quietly and waited. After nearly 10 minutes of silence, the footsteps retreated into the woods. The next morning, I walked the yard. The grass was disturbed in a straight line, from the woods to the exact spot where he'd stood. I called the landlord. He sighed like he had heard this before and told me to keep the doors locked. He said the property bordered old hunting trails and that sometimes people got turned around. That didn't explain the way he stood in one place. It didn't explain how he seemed to appear only at night. A few days later, I came home from work and found something placed on my porch. A single smooth river stone, gray, cold, set directly in front of the door. I picked it up, confused. Underneath it was a small strip of yellow fabric, torn, frayed. I dropped the stone immediately. The woods behind my house didn't have a river. There was no reason for a smooth stone like that to be there. That night, the footsteps came again. This time closer, slow, deliberate. I heard breathing outside the bedroom window. Not loud, but steady, too close. I stayed in bed, frozen, until dawn. In the morning, another stone sat on the porch. This one larger, placed carefully in the exact center of the welcome mat. I started driving home a different way every evening. I kept all the curtains closed. I stopped using the porch entirely. Each night I sat in the living room, listening, waiting, feeling watched even when everything was silent. Then something new happened. One Saturday afternoon while doing laundry, I found leaves on the hallway floor. Fresh ones, damp, their edges torn. I had not opened any windows. I checked the back door. The lock was still latched, but the frame had a faint scrape near the knob. Someone had tried to get in. My chest tightened. I called the police. An officer came by and looked around, but with no forced entry, no sign of a break-in, and no suspect, there wasn't much they could do. He suggested installing cameras. He also asked if I had any enemies. I didn't. That night was the worst one. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the footsteps again. Not outside this time, on the porch. Slow pacing, back and forth. The boards creaked under each step. Then a soft knock. Not on the front door, on the wall next to my bedroom. 3 taps, spaced out evenly. I couldn't bring myself to move. A minute later, the porch steps creaked as someone walked down. I waited until the sky started to lighten before looking outside. A third stone sat on the porch, bigger than the last 2, set exactly where the others had been. Next to it was a strip of yellow fabric tied into a loop. I packed a bag and drove to my brother's house without bothering to turn off the lights. The landlord called that evening saying a neighbor had reported my front door was open. When he checked the property, the doorframe was splintered near the lock. Something had forced it. He told me he found footprints leading from the porch toward the woods, deep ones, like someone had stood there for a long time before walking away. I told him I wasn't coming back. I didn't even return for the rest of my things. I hired a moving service to clear out whatever they could during the day. They told me the woods behind the house felt wrong and asked if someone had been camping back there. I didn't answer. A week later, a deputy called to ask if I knew anyone who wore a gray jacket or carried hunting gear. A farmer had found a makeshift shelter deeper in the woods. A tarp, food wrappers, a small pile of river stones arranged in a circle. Next to the stones was a strip of yellow fabric tied into a loop. They never found whoever lived there. I no longer rent secluded homes. I no longer sleep near windows. And sometimes when I'm walking to my car at night, I swear I feel eyes on me from the nearest dark tree line. Because whoever stood in my yard night after night never came for the house itself. He came for me. I wasn't supposed to be out that late. My name is Tyler Briggs, and when this happened, I was 26, working a late shift at a warehouse outside Columbus. I normally drove straight home afterward, but that night I took a different route because the highway ramp was closed. That detour put me on a long stretch of old road running between two quiet neighborhoods, the kind with only a handful of houses and a single flickering streetlight at the corner. I remember the air felt wrong as soon as I turned onto that road. Too still, too empty, not even crickets. Even my radio started cutting in and out like the signal was being smothered. Then I saw him, a man standing directly under the lone streetlight. He wasn't walking or waiting for a ride. He stood perfectly still, head slightly tilted, hands in the pockets of a dark jacket. His face was angled just enough that the shadow hid most of it. As I drove closer, my headlights lit him up, and he didn't react at all. Not a blink, not a flinch. People wait outside all the time. That wasn't what scared me. What scared me was that as I passed him, I noticed his shoes. They were covered in mud, up to the ankles, thick dark mud. The kind you'd only get from the woods or a riverbank, nowhere near the houses around us. I kept driving, telling myself I was being dramatic. A minute later, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I ignored it. It buzzed again, then again, 3 times in 30 seconds. When it rang a 4th time, I answered. A man whispered into the phone. "Why didn't you stop?" I hung up immediately. My heart started pounding. I checked my mirrors. Only darkness behind me. Another call. Same number. I didn't pick up. The voicemail notification appeared almost instantly. Against my better judgment, I listened to it. Breathing. Slow, steady breathing. Then a faint scrape, like something dragging across asphalt. I threw my phone onto the passenger seat and kept driving. The road curved ahead. As I rounded the bend, my headlights washed over another streetlight. Another empty intersection, and the same man standing beneath it. Same jacket, same muddy shoes, same head tilt. There was no possible way he got there before me, not unless he sprinted through the yards and somehow beat my car. Even then he would have been out of breath, moving, something. But he was still, exactly as before. The moment my headlights hit him, his head snapped just slightly toward me, not fully turning. Just enough to show he knew I was there. My hands tightened around the wheel. I felt frozen for a second, like prey. This time I ran the light. I didn't care if it turned red. My phone started ringing again. Same number. I shut it off completely. I took the next turn, far too fast. Houses blurred past. My pulse hammered in my ears. Up ahead, another intersection came into view. My stomach dropped the second I saw it. He was there again. This time, not under the streetlight. He was standing directly in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, just in time. My tires skidded, the car fishtailing for a moment before stopping 20 feet from him. My headlights lit his entire face now. His expression was blank, his eyes fixed on me without blinking. He stepped forward once. Just one slow, careful step. I threw the car into reverse, backing up as fast as I could, without losing control. I turned into the nearest driveway, shot back out, and sped in the opposite direction. I don't even remember most of that drive home. I only remember checking the rearview mirror over and over, always expecting to see him standing in the road behind me. When I finally got to my apartment and locked the door, I turned my phone on again just long enough to check the call log. 9 missed calls, all from the same unknown number. And one text, "You saw me." I blocked the number immediately, but that wasn't the end. 2 days later, as I was leaving for work before sunset, I noticed something near my car, a set of footprints in the dew on the pavement. Not shoe prints, bare footprints, leading from the sidewalk to the driver's side door. I went to the police. They took a report, but with no suspect, no face clearly seen, and nothing taken or damaged. There wasn't much they could do. They suggested maybe someone was messing with me. That night I parked in a different spot. The next morning the footprints were there again. Closer this time. One of them was angled toward my front door. I moved a week later, changed my route to work, changed my phone number. For months nothing happened. I almost convinced myself it had been some strange coincidence, some man wandering, some messed up prank. Then one foggy morning I stepped outside my new apartment building and saw muddy footprints on the sidewalk. Not random. A straight line, leading toward the road, toward a single old streetlight that flickered in the gray morning air. And under it stood a man in a dark jacket with mud up to his ankles. His head tilted slowly. And even from that distance, I knew he was smiling.